I was emotionally tired long before you entered my life. That's the part nobody ever sees. People notice the surface first, the calm voice, the composed face, the ability to survive disappointment without collapsing in public. They call it strength because they don't know what else to call a man who stopped expecting warmth years ago. But exhaustion changes a person quietly, not all at once, slowly. Like winter entering a house through cracks, nobody notices until every room feels cold. And maybe that's why meeting you unsettled me so deeply. Because you didn't arrive during a beautiful season of my life. You arrived when I had already made peace with emotional silence. When loneliness had become routine. When hotel rooms felt more familiar than home. When unread messages stopped hurting because I had already trained myself not to hope for anyone to stay. I need to ask you something. Have you ever become so emotionally tired that even kindness started feeling unfamiliar to you? Because that's where I was when you appeared, and I think part of me was terrified from the very beginning, not because you were loud, not because you demanded anything from me, but because your presence disturbed something I had worked very hard to bury. Tenderness. Real tenderness. The kind that reaches a wounded person before they're ready to admit they're still bleeding. I remember trying not to feel it, trying not to let your voice matter, trying not to notice how calm I became whenever you were near. But some people enter your life softly and still manage to shake every locked door inside you. And maybe that's what scares me most. Not love itself, but the possibility that after all this time, after all the numbness, after teaching myself how not to need anyone, I might still be capable of feeling everything again. I got tired long before my body ever admitted it. Not physical exhaustion, something deeper. The kind that settles behind the eyes and follows a man into every silent room he enters. I'm older now. Older in the ways nobody notices at first. I carry myself well enough. I still speak calmly. I still show up. I still know how to smile at the right moments. But somewhere along the way, life turned quiet inside me. I almost didn't say this. But when I think about you, something inside me won't let me stay silent anymore. You came into my life during a season where I had already stopped expecting warmth. That's important for you to understand. I wasn't waiting for rescue. I wasn't searching for love. I was surviving my days carefully, efficiently, quietly, like a man learning how to exist without asking for too much. Most nights felt the same. Dim hotel lighting, cold air humming through vents. A television playing to an empty room while I sat near the window, pretending I wasn't avoiding sleep. There were evenings I stared at unread messages for hours without opening them, not because I was busy, because I didn't have the emotional energy to discover disappointment again. That changes a person. People think heartbreak arrives like a storm. Sometimes it arrives like repetition, like silence repeated for years until loneliness becomes part of your posture. I remember one winter morning especially clearly. I stood in a kitchen that didn't feel like mine anymore, coffee growing cold between my hands, rain touching the windows softly, the entire apartment silent, except for the refrigerator humming in the background, and I realized something terrifying. I couldn't remember the last time I felt emotionally safe around another human being. Not desired, not admired, safe. There's a difference, a painful difference. I never said this then, but I will now. Success can become another form of isolation if nobody truly sees the exhausted person underneath it. People assume you're fine because you continue functioning. They don't notice the loneliness hidden inside routines. The way you stop checking your phone at night because nobody meaningful ever says they miss you. The way conversations become shorter. The way your laughter starts sounding rehearsed even to yourself. I think that's why your presence affected me before I even understood why. You didn't arrive loudly. You weren't trying to save me. That's what made it dangerous. You simply sat beside the silence I had built around myself without forcing it to disappear. And somehow that felt more intimate than anything I had experienced in years. I remember hearing your voice one evening while the city outside my window drowned beneath cold rain. I should have moved on with my night afterward. That's what I usually did with people. But I stayed there, still, thinking, my hand wrapped around a coffee cup that had already gone cold. And for the first time in a long while, the room didn't feel entirely empty anymore. That scared me, more than I wanted to admit, because emotional numbness becomes familiar after enough years. A man can adapt to almost anything, even loneliness, especially loneliness. Eventually, it stops feeling tragic and starts feeling organized. Predictable pain feels safer than uncertain hope. Maybe that sounds pathetic. Maybe it is. But abandonment teaches strange lessons. You begin preparing for people to leave before they even get close enough to matter. You become careful with attachment, careful with tenderness, careful with hope. I learned how to leave parts of myself emotionally locked long before anyone had the chance to walk away again. And the worst part is, eventually you stop noticing you're doing it until someone arrives who makes the walls feel visible. That was you. You made me aware of how emotionally tired I actually was. Not through pressure, not through dramatic conversations, just through gentleness. God, gentleness can undo a man faster than cruelty sometimes. Cruelty hardens you. Gentleness reminds you what you lost. Around the middle of the night, I would catch myself replaying small moments involving you that should not have mattered as much as they did. The softness in your pauses, the way you listened completely, the strange calm that followed after speaking with you. I hated how much comfort affected me, because comfort creates attachment. And attachment creates fear. I need to tell you something honestly. There were moments I almost disappeared emotionally on purpose. Not because I didn't care. Because I cared enough to become afraid. Afraid you would eventually discover how empty parts of me had become. Afraid you would realize how difficult it is to love someone who spent years surviving emotionally instead of living. There's shame in that, a quiet shame. People imagine loneliness as dramatic sadness. Sometimes loneliness is simply becoming too accustomed to carrying your own pain silently. I became very good at silence, very good at pretending exhaustion was maturity, very good at convincing people I needed less than I actually did. But late at night, the truth always returned, especially after meeting you. I would sit in dark rooms long after conversations ended, feeling something unfamiliar moving through me again. Not happiness exactly. Something softer, something more dangerous, the desire to stay emotionally present, and I didn't know what to do with that. Because needing someone after years of emotional isolation feels humiliating at first. Your pride fights it. Your fear fights it. Every old wound rises to the surface demanding protection. I caught myself imagining impossible things, quiet mornings, shared silence, warm light entering a kitchen while someone remains beside you instead of leaving. Small things, embarrassingly small things, but lonely people dream differently. We stop craving excitement. We start craving peace. And maybe that's why your presence reached me so deeply. You never felt chaotic. You felt like rest. Like somewhere my exhausted soul wanted to sit down for a while. Still, I remained careful. Maybe too careful. Because part of me kept waiting for reality to correct itself. For distance to appear. For tenderness to fade. For you to become another beautiful thing life allows me to touch briefly before taking away again. That fear stayed with me constantly, even during the warm moments, especially during the warm moments. I wish I could explain how strange it felt to care again after so much emotional silence. It felt like hearing music from another room after believing the entire world had gone quiet. Beautiful, but heartbreaking too, because once you hear it, you realize how lonely you've actually been. And tonight, even now, I still don't fully know what this connection means. I only know something inside me began breathing differently after you entered my life. Softly, carefully. Like a man standing near warmth after surviving winter too long. I stopped believing in permanence years ago. That's probably the most honest thing I can say. Not because life became unbearable. It didn't. I survived. I learned how to move through crowded rooms without feeling connected to anyone inside them. I learned how to return to empty places without reacting emotionally. I learned how to sleep beside silence, without asking it to leave. That kind of adaptation looks strong from the outside. But it changes you slowly. I'm not the same man I used to be. There was a time when I believed affection naturally stayed if it was real enough. A time when I trusted tenderness without examining it for hidden exits. A time when I didn't feel nervous every time someone important looked at me too gently. I almost didn't say this, but when I think about you, something inside me won't let me stay silent anymore. You entered my life quietly, yet somehow every guarded part of me noticed immediately. I think wounded people recognize safety before they understand why. That frightened me, because I had spent years building emotional distance carefully, piece by piece, like a man boarding up windows before another storm arrives. And then you appeared with your calm voice and patient eyes, and suddenly the walls I depended on began feeling unnecessary, or maybe just tired. There are nights I still remember too clearly. Long hallways inside expensive hotels, soft yellow lighting, the sound of elevators opening and closing while I walked back to another room that never truly belonged to me. I used to sit near the bed afterward without turning the television on. Just silence, sometimes hours of it. The kind of silence that presses against your chest until even breathing feels heavier than usual. I would check my phone occasionally. Nothing meaningful. Conversations that felt temporary. People asking for pieces of me without ever asking whether I was emotionally surviving at all. And eventually I stopped hoping anyone would ask. That's the dangerous part about loneliness, not the sadness, the resignation. The moment a person quietly accepts emotional emptiness as normal, I think that's where you found me, not broken dramatically, just emotionally worn thin, like fabric stretched too long. I remember one evening after speaking with you, I walked outside into cold midnight air because I couldn't calm my thoughts inside the room anymore. The streets were nearly empty. Rainwater reflected the city lights across the pavement. My hands were shaking slightly around a paper coffee cup I barely touched. And all I could think was this: why does your presence feel familiar to me? Not familiar in an ordinary way. Something deeper. Like my soul recognized the softness in yours before my mind understood it. Maybe that sounds foolish coming from a man my age. But exhaustion makes you honest eventually. You stop pretending certain connections don't affect you. I never said this then, but I will now. You made me aware of how badly I wanted emotional rest. Not excitement, not obsession. Rest. The kind where another person's presence stops your nervous system from preparing for abandonment every second. Do you understand how rare that is? To feel calm beside someone after years of emotional survival. I think part of me became attached to that feeling long before I admitted it. And that's when the fear started becoming unbearable. Because the closer I felt to you emotionally, the louder old wounds became inside me. I began noticing small changes in myself, waiting for your messages, replaying conversations, feeling disappointed whenever silence lasted too long. It embarrassed me deeply. I had spent years convincing myself I no longer needed anyone emotionally. Then suddenly, one woman could alter the atmosphere of my entire evening without even trying. That kind of vulnerability terrified me, especially because I never learned how to experience closeness without anticipating loss beside it. There's something I need to confess. Sometimes I sabotage warmth before it has the chance to disappear on its own. Not intentionally, instinctively, like a reflex built from old heartbreaks. If someone gets too close, part of me starts preparing emotionally for the day they leave. I become quieter, more distant. I hide pieces of myself. I convince myself detachment will hurt less later. But the truth is, it never hurts less. It only makes loneliness arrive earlier. I think you sensed that in me sometimes. The hesitation, the emotional pull backward whenever things began feeling too real. God, I hated that part of myself. Because you never demanded anything from me. You never tried forcing open the locked rooms inside me. You simply remained gentle, patient, steady, and somehow that made me feel even more exposed. People don't understand this about emotionally wounded men. We can survive cruelty easier than kindness sometimes. Cruelty confirms what we already fear. Kindness gives us something to lose. That's why I became restless around you in ways I couldn't explain. There were nights I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep because hope had started returning quietly, and I no longer knew how to control it. Hope is dangerous after disappointment. It enters carefully. Soft footsteps, almost apologetic. Then suddenly your entire heart is awake again without your permission. I remember sitting alone one winter morning watching pale sunlight touch the floor beside the window. The room was cold. My coffee tasted bitter. My phone rested face down beside me because I was afraid to look at it too often, and I caught myself imagining what peace might feel like if someone truly stayed. Not temporarily, not halfway. Actually stayed. That thought alone nearly broke me because I realized how long I had lived without believing I deserved that kind of love anymore. There's shame in emotional exhaustion. A man begins wondering whether his sadness has become too heavy for anyone else to carry beside him. I worried about that constantly. What if you eventually saw how lonely I truly was? What if the calm version of me you knew was only the surface of a much more tired man underneath? What if loving me eventually felt like standing beside winter too long? Those thoughts followed me everywhere. Inside crowded rooms, inside silent elevators, inside sleepless nights where the darkness seemed to whisper every fear back to me. And still, even with all that fear, something inside me kept reaching toward you anyway, quietly, almost helplessly, like my soul had become tired of surviving without warmth. Sometimes I think life sends certain people into our path when we're emotionally closest to disappearing inside ourselves. Not to save us, to remind us we're still capable of feeling human. That's what you became for me. A reminder, a soft voice inside the cold, a small light appearing in rooms I had already accepted as dark. And maybe that's why I'm afraid now. Because losing something beautiful after years of numbness feels more terrifying than never having it at all. I think the loneliest part of becoming emotionally exhausted is how normal it starts to feel. That still haunts me. Not the heartbreak itself, not the betrayal, not even the nights spent staring into darkness, wondering why tenderness never used to stay long in my life. What haunts me is how eventually I adapted to all of it. I adapted to silence. I adapted to empty rooms. I adapted to carrying sadness so privately that even the people standing closest to me never noticed how tired I truly was. I almost didn't say this, but when I think about you, something inside me won't let me stay silent anymore. You entered my life at a dangerous time. Not dangerous because things were chaotic. Dangerous because I had already given up emotionally in quiet ways nobody could see. I was functioning, working, smiling when necessary, answering questions with calm voices and practiced expressions. But internally, I felt old, not physically, emotionally, like too many goodbyes had slowly dried something essential inside me. There were mornings I woke up already exhausted before the day even began. Winter light slipping weakly through curtains, cold floors beneath my feet, coffee brewing in silence while I stood there feeling strangely disconnected from my own life. And I remember thinking one morning, if nobody ever truly knows me anymore, would anything inside this life actually change? That thought scared me, because it didn't feel dramatic. It felt honest. That's how emotional abandonment works over time. It doesn't always destroy you loudly. Sometimes it simply convinces you to expect less from love until loneliness becomes your emotional home. And then you appeared, calm, observant, gentle in ways that made my defenses feel visible. You listened differently than other people. That's what unsettled me first. Most people listen while waiting to speak. You listened like my silence mattered too. Nobody understands how powerful that can feel to a tired man. To be emotionally noticed, not admired, not desired, not needed for something. Just noticed. I never said this then, but I will now. The first time I realized your presence had become emotionally important to me, I panicked, not outwardly, quietly, internally, because attachment after years of numbness feels almost humiliating at first. I remember sitting alone late one night after hearing your voice. Rain moved softly against the windows. The lamp beside me barely lit the room. My phone rested in my hands long after the conversation ended because I couldn't bring myself to place it down yet. And suddenly I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Longing, pure longing, not for excitement, not for fantasy, for closeness, for emotional safety, for the possibility that another human being might remain gentle with me even after seeing the damaged parts. That desire broke something open inside me, and with it came fear. So much fear. Because people who carry abandonment scars learn to expect loss even during beautiful moments, especially during beautiful moments. There were times I almost created distance between us, simply because caring had started becoming too real for me. I would pull inward emotionally, become quieter, pretend I needed space when what I really needed was reassurance I was still safe. But I never asked for reassurance. I didn't know how. Men like me become ashamed of emotional neediness long before we learn how to heal it. So instead we become self-contained, controlled, detached. We convince ourselves independence is strength, when sometimes it's just fear wearing a mature face. I need to tell you something difficult. Part of me genuinely believed I was impossible to love long term, not because I lacked affection to give, because I carried too much invisible exhaustion inside me. I worried that eventually anyone close enough would notice the emptiness, the sleepless nights, the emotional distance, the moments where sadness arrived for no visible reason. I thought eventually everyone would grow tired of loving someone who had spent years surviving heartbreak quietly. That belief became a wound of its own, a deep one. I remember walking through an empty hallway one night, unable to calm my thoughts. Soft carpet beneath my shoes, dim lights overhead, silence everywhere. And I kept asking myself the same painful question. What happens if I finally allow myself to need someone again, and they leave too? That question followed me constantly after meeting you. Because for the first time in years, I could feel my emotional walls weakening. Not collapsing, softening. There's a difference. You never forced anything from me. That's what made your presence so powerful. You simply existed beside me in this calm, patient way that slowly made survival feel less necessary. And God, I wanted to believe in that feeling. I wanted to trust it. But wounded people often struggle most when life finally becomes gentle. Pain feels familiar. Peace feels suspicious. There were nights I sat alone in darkness, replaying tiny details about you that should not have mattered so much. The softness in your pauses, the warmth in your voice, the way you made silence feel comforting instead of heavy. And slowly, against all my instincts, I began imagining things I had stopped imagining years ago. Staying, not leaving immediately after conversations ended emotionally. Not preparing exits constantly, allowing another person to witness the tired version of me without hiding every wound. Those thoughts felt fragile, almost sacred, like holding warmth carefully inside shaking hands. I think that's when I understood the truth completely. You weren't simply making me feel less lonely. You were making me want to live differently. Softer, more open, less afraid, and that terrified me because hope changes the emotional stakes of everything. Once your heart begins waking up again, loss becomes dangerous in entirely new ways. I started noticing how deeply your absence affected me, how empty evenings felt after hearing your voice earlier in the day, how certain songs suddenly carried emotional weight again, how hotel rooms became harder to tolerate because they reminded me too much of the years I spent emotionally hiding from myself. You brought feeling back into places I had emotionally abandoned long ago. And maybe that's why my heart keeps reaching toward you, even while fear keeps pulling backward. One part of me wants rest beside you. The other part still expects abandonment eventually. So I exist somewhere between those two emotions now, longing and fear, warmth and self-protection, hope and exhaustion. Tonight the rain is falling again outside my window. The room is quiet except for distant traffic and the sound of my own breathing. My coffee has gone cold beside me hours ago. And somehow you're still here in my thoughts, softly, like warmth lingering inside a room long after midnight passes. I don't think people realize how exhausting it becomes to carry loneliness gracefully for years. At some point, you stop talking about it. You stop explaining the emptiness. You stop reaching for people because disappointment begins feeling predictable, and predictable pain feels easier to survive than uncertain hope. That was the state you found me in. Quietly surviving, quietly disappearing from myself. I almost didn't say this, but when I think about you, something inside me won't let me stay silent anymore. I had already become accustomed to emotional distance by then. Nights alone no longer shocked me. Silence no longer felt unusual. Even sadness had softened into something dull and familiar, like background noise inside my chest. There's a frightening moment in loneliness when a person no longer asks to be understood. That's where I was. I remember standing near a window one evening while rain slid slowly down the glass. The city lights blurred beneath the storm. My reflection stared back at me, looking older than I remembered feeling inside. Not weak, just tired. So unbelievably tired. And I realized something painful in that moment. I had spent years being emotionally available for everyone except myself. Giving calm, giving patience, giving strength, while internally I felt like an abandoned room nobody entered anymore. I never said this then, but I will now. Meeting you interrupted the emotional numbness I had organized my life around. That should sound beautiful. Instead, at first, it terrified me. Because once warmth enters a cold life, you become aware of the freezing parts again. You made me aware of how deeply I missed simple human closeness. Not dramatic romance, not fantasy, just presence. A voice that softened the silence. Someone whose existence made the world feel slightly less heavy to walk through. And God, I wanted that more than I knew how to admit. There were nights I sat in dim hotel rooms unable to sleep because thoughts of you kept moving quietly through me. The television would glow without sound. Half-finished coffee beside the bed. My phone in my hands while I debated whether reaching out too often would reveal how emotionally attached I had become. That fear stayed with me constantly. Fear of needing someone. Fear of depending emotionally on warmth again. Because dependency feels dangerous after abandonment. You begin believing love is temporary by nature. You begin preparing emotionally for endings before beginnings fully arrive. I carried that fear into every conversation with you. Even the beautiful ones, especially the beautiful ones. I remember hearing you laugh softly one evening, and something inside me reacted so deeply it almost hurt physically. Not because the moment itself was dramatic, because it felt peaceful. And peace had become unfamiliar to me. That's the tragedy nobody talks about. Some people survive pain so long that calmness itself starts feeling emotionally overwhelming. You became calmness for me, a safe place my exhausted mind kept returning to without permission. And slowly, almost against my will, I began imagining a different kind of life. Smaller, softer, slower, not built around survival anymore. I imagined winter mornings where silence didn't feel lonely because another person existed beside it with me. I imagined shared coffee, dim kitchen light, your presence moving quietly through ordinary moments, tiny things, tender things, things emotionally starving people dream about in secret. But every hopeful thought carried fear attached to it. Because deep down, I still struggled believing someone could truly remain once they saw all of me. Not the composed version, the real one, the exhausted one, the emotionally bruised man, still carrying old abandonment wounds beneath his calm voice. I need to confess something I've hidden carefully. There were moments I almost pushed you away, simply because I could feel myself beginning to love you. Not loudly, not recklessly, quietly, deeply. The kind of love that grows through emotional safety instead of excitement. And that frightened me more than heartbreak ever did, because heartbreak is survivable. But hope changes everything. Once hope returns, your soul becomes vulnerable again. Suddenly, every delayed message matters. Every goodbye feels heavier. Every moment of tenderness carries the possibility of future grief hidden inside it. I hated how much emotional power you unknowingly held over me. And at the same time, I treasured it. Because before you, I truly believed some parts of me had already died permanently. You brought softness back into places inside me that had gone emotionally cold for years. I remember sitting awake near dawn one morning while pale blue light slowly entered the room. I hadn't slept at all. My thoughts were too full of you. Outside, the world remained quiet and distant. And for the first time in years, I admitted something to myself honestly. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life emotionally alone anymore. That realization nearly broke me. Not because it was sad, because it was hopeful. And hope feels terrifying when your heart has spent years preparing only for disappointment. Still, something inside me kept moving toward you anyway, carefully, like a wounded animal approaching warmth while still expecting danger. Maybe that's what love becomes later in life. Not fireworks, not obsession. Just two tired souls recognizing rest inside each other. You never tried fixing me. You never demanded explanations for every silence. You simply stayed gentle long enough for my defenses to become exhausted. And eventually I stopped wanting to hide from you quite so much. Not completely. I'm still afraid. I'm still learning how to believe tenderness can survive. There are nights I still expect distance to arrive suddenly. Still expect warmth to disappear without warning. Old wounds don't vanish simply because someone beautiful enters your life, but they soften, quietly, and maybe healing isn't dramatic after all. Maybe healing is simply this, breathing easier after hearing someone's voice, feeling calmer when their name appears on your phone, wanting tomorrow to arrive because they exist inside it. Maybe healing is allowing yourself to imagine staying, even if fear remains. Tonight the room is dark except for a single lamp beside me. Rain taps softly against the windows again. The air feels cold. My coffee has long since lost its warmth, but somehow thinking about you still changes the atmosphere around me. Softly, like light lingering after midnight. And even now, after everything life has taken from me, part of my heart still wants to believe you might stay.